The task, monumental. Build the world's largest dam and do it in less than 7 years. Nothing like it had ever been attempted. Now, Hoover Dam on Modern Marvels. Located in the middle of America's Southwest Desert stands a monumental product of human ingenuity and accomplishment, a vessel of life-giving water and a structure of awe-inspiring size. 726 feet high, weighing 6.6 million tons, and creating a lake 150 miles long, Hoover Dam is impressive and controversial. So were the people who built it. Personalities such as the stern Sims Ely, the law of the land, and Frank Crowe, the feared and respected head of construction. Thousands labored to build Hoover Dam. Workers constantly struggled against the environment and often their employers. The damming of the Colorado River created Lake Mead, the largest man-made reservoir in the world. Ironically, it's located in one of the driest places on Earth, 30 miles southeast of Las Vegas, Nevada. Hoover Dam symbolizes the human spirit's discontent to accept nature's rules. Building the Hoover Dam was a colossal undertaking in 1931, the largest government project ever attempted. Constructed in the depths of the Depression, its purpose was to provide flood control, irrigation, drinking water, and electricity. It promised to change barren to bountiful. Water is essential to life, and nowhere is that better understood than in the dry climate of the American Southwest.
The Southwest is an arid area, and without a dam like Hoover Dam to control the flow of the river and make the water available when it's needed, we just couldn't have the level of economic development that we have in the Southwest today.
Thanks to the Hoover Dam, the Colorado River began irrigating more than 1 million acres of farmland. Cities sprouted, and Las Vegas became Las Vegas. Hoover Dam is one of the primary attractions for those visiting Las Vegas. At over 60 years old, it hasn't lost its appeal. More than 1 million people visit the dam a year. Overwhelming in its scope and size, it draws visitors from around the world. The dam's enormity is matched only by its dramatic history. The Hoover Dam was the first major attempt to tame the mighty Colorado River, the same river that carved the Grand Canyon. The 1,400-mile river drains water from 7 states: Wyoming, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, California, Arizona, and New Mexico, and delivers its precious payload to the Gulf of California. Snow melting in the Rocky Mountains sends a torrent of water down the Colorado every spring, but then dries to a trickle by summer.
The early settlers who were trying to build an economy, built lives at the bottom end of this river, they planted their crops and built their fields and built homes and businesses. In the spring times, those would be subject to inundation or destruction because of the floods coming down the river. And by the end of the summer, when the farmers really needed that water to get their crops to maturity, they couldn't get to the water.
They needed a way to regulate the flow of the river, holding back the devastating floodwater in spring and delivering the life-giving water in the dry summer. Man's attempts to harness the power of the Colorado River date back a century. In 1901, a private company constructed a canal system that brought water from the Colorado River and delivered it to the arid but fertile Imperial Valley of Southern California. California Development Company promised bountiful harvests in what was once barren desert. Irrigation would make it possible. The company cut an opening in the western bank of the Colorado River and installed a headgate which controlled water flow. Initially, the system of small gates and channels worked beyond expectation. Fields produced a bounty of fruit and vegetables. It appeared as though the canal system was a major success. Soon thousands of people flocked to the Imperial Valley with dreams of finding a new Eden. But their dreams soon turned into a nightmare. After several years of prosperity, the unpredictable Colorado unleashed its vengeance, reminding settlers how dangerous it was to play with nature's plumbing.
The problem was these were not very well engineered works, and they weren't very good. And the Colorado River in 1905 had a major flood come down the river, and it washed out these headworks and flowed into the Imperial Valley for 18 months. Essentially created what is today the Salton Sea, destroyed much of the agricultural land, destroyed homes, destroyed businesses, really wreaked havoc.
Experts predicted the Salton Sea would continue to grow, eventually drowning millions of acres of California and Arizona. Something had to be done. In 1910, the federal government dammed the breach, but it was only a temporary solution. What was needed was a dam, a giant dam. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation initiated a study to determine feasibility. In 1922, Arthur Powell Davis, director of the Bureau of Reclamation, recommended a series of reservoirs to control the entire river. Known as the Fall-Davis Report, the centerpiece of the plan was a colossal dam to be built in Boulder Canyon between Nevada and Arizona. Before the measure could proceed, the states had to decide on an equitable division of water. Water meant agriculture, cities, industry, growth, and inevitably there was some disagreement. Arizona believed California was trying to steal an unfair share of water.
There's always a fight over water in the West. When water is scarce, there's going to be tension over water, and that was the case years ago. It's still the case today.
Herbert Hoover, then Secretary of Commerce, stepped in to break the stalemate that developed between the states. In 1922, 7 states signed the Colorado River Compact, which divided water rights to the river. However, the Arizona state legislature, still not satisfied, successfully blocked legislation for several years. But finally, in 1929, the Boulder Canyon Project Act passed in Congress. It called for a high dam near a small railroad town named Las Vegas, Nevada. The Bureau of Reclamation worked to design a dam like no other. The challenge was to design a structure capable of holding back trillions of gallons of water, built in a very high yet narrow canyon. They considered 30 different designs before finding the answer. The final plan, a mammoth arched gravity dam.
Hoover Dam is a combination of gravity and arch dam. Gravity dams are dams that are just so massive, the weight of them themselves can hold back the weight of the water behind them. And then arch dams traditionally are built in the shape of an arch. It's kind of like an eggshell. You know, an eggshell is very thin, but the egg itself is very strong. If you try to press in on the 2 ends of an egg, you'll find that you can't crush an egg. It's the strength of the arch.
The Bureau of Reclamation's planned arched gravity dam would be a behemoth, as tall as a 70-story skyscraper, over 2 football fields thick at the base, and capable of storing trillions of gallons of water. It would not only be the largest dam in the world, it would easily be the single biggest construction project in the history of the United States. But the immense size of the proposed dam was not the only obstacle. The dam would be located in one of the most desolate areas in the world.
There was nothing here. I mean, I sometimes question the audacity of the people who had the courage and the conviction to think they could build a dam out in the middle of a desert where nothing existed. There were no roads to the site. There was no power to the site. There was no labor force here. There was nowhere for the people to live who were going to come and build the dam.
In spite of all the obstacles, the dam had to be perfect, capable of handling even the greatest floods. If it were to fail, a wall of water would race down the river, killing thousands. Surveyors decided to move the location from Boulder Canyon to Black Canyon, 8 miles downstream. The move would allow for a bigger body of water, the largest man-made reservoir in the world. Congress gave the go-ahead to begin construction. The task was great. Hire an army of thousands, divert the river around the dam site, and form a mountain of concrete into a dam in the middle of nowhere. The question remained, could it be done? Lake Mead, the reservoir created by Hoover Dam, contains enough water to cover the entire state of Pennsylvania with 1 foot of water. Hoover Dam will return on Modern Marvels. In 1930, the Bureau of Reclamation's plan for controlling the Colorado River was extensive. The government would provide materials and certain services for the dam, but the dam would be built almost entirely by the lowest bidder from the private sector. But before the lowest bidder was determined, the federal government began working on the project. Good news for a nation entering the Great Depression. The Bureau of Reclamation's first objective was to connect by rail Las Vegas to Black Canyon, the site chosen for the dam. Although the site had changed from Boulder Canyon to Black Canyon, the endeavor was still called the Boulder Canyon Project. People naturally anticipated the name would be Boulder Dam. The location switch caused some confusion, but at a railroad spike driving ceremony, Ray Wilbur, Secretary of the Interior under President Herbert Hoover, set the record straight.
Secretary of the Interior Ray Lyman Wilbur came out to drive the Silver Spike to begin construction of the railroad spur from Las Vegas out to Boulder City town site. And that day is the day that he announced, well, we're going to call it Hoover Dam. Well, this was a year after the stock market had crashed and the Depression was settling in, and people were not at all happy with Hoover.
Despite the public's disapproval of President Hoover, they welcomed the job opportunities. People were desperate for work. Soon, thousands poured into the Las Vegas area in hopes of finding employment.
Before the construction started, before they hired anybody, they came because they knew there was a chance of a job, just a rumor of a job.
Before any social programs, the only choice the unemployed had was to search out work, wherever it might be. Unfortunately, the dam was to be built in one of the most inhospitable climates in the world, where temperatures regularly reached 120 degrees and shelter simply didn't exist. Desperate people brought their entire families, set up makeshift camps, and waited for work. Cardboard and canvas changed cars into campers. Without any place to go and nowhere to stay, families lived in their cars. Ragtown was the fitting name given to one of the earliest camps. Located at the mouth of the High Canyon, Ragtown was also one of the hottest areas. Motivated by the ever-increasing unemployment rate, government work began as soon as funds were available. On January 10, 1931, the true scope of the project became public knowledge. The Bureau of Reclamation supplied plans to anyone interested, and it seemed everyone was interested in the largest government contract ever issued. The blueprints detailed an immense structure, taller than any dam in the world, 726 feet in height, and nearly as thick at the base. The process of dam building called for tremendous diversion tunnels 50 feet in diameter to alter the course of the river, temporary cofferdams to provide a dry work area, and the pouring of 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete. Nothing existed at the dam site. Concrete mixing plants, cooling plants, living quarters for 5,000 men and their families, cableways and metalworks had to be constructed. The sheer size of the project intimidated even the most confident contractors. Build the largest dam in the world in the middle of the desert and do it in less than 7 years. The government imposed deadline.
There wasn't any company in the United States that was big enough to handle the dam. So there were 6 contractors that got together and formed the consortium of 6 companies.
6 companies was composed of 6 giant construction firms, united for the sole purpose of bidding on the Boulder Canyon project. Each of the firms was familiar with big projects. They independently shaped the West, building railroads, tunnels, bridges, and highways. Between the 6, perhaps they had enough experience and resources to build a dam of such great magnitude, but they needed someone who was respected in the field of dam construction to oversee the project. Someone the Bureau of Reclamation would feel confident could get the job done.
They chose Frank Crow to be their foreman here, the superintendent of the job, and he was a hands-on foreman. He didn't spend much time behind his desk.
Frank Crow was the most respected dam builder in America. With him on board, 6 companies was ready to make a bid for the dam construction. On March 4th, 1931, the Bureau of Reclamation opened sealed bids. Of the hundreds of interested parties, there were only a handful of qualified bidders. Tension ran high as each of the bids were opened. The 6 companies firm won the contract with the lowest bid of $48,890,955. It was the largest government contract ever awarded. Blasting began almost immediately. 6 companies had their work cut out for them. Initially, even getting to the dam site was an obstacle. There were no roads from the rim to the bottom of the canyon. Men instead took small ferries to the dam site. Later, cableways were erected across the canyon to get men and materials to the bottom. The first monumental task was diverting the river around the dam site. Engineers needed a dry work area in which to set the dam. To add to the pressure, the Bureau of Reclamation initiated stiff fines for missed deadlines at each stage of construction. 4 tunnels had to be drilled through the canyon walls to circumvent the site. The gigantic 56-foot tunnels averaged 3/4 of a mile in length and would carry the entire volume of the Colorado River. Workmen drilled blasting holes and loaded them with dynamite. A special 3-story truck holding drillers at 3 different levels expedited the process. Digging continued for 13 months, drilling, blasting, and removing millions of cubic yards of debris. An endless stream of trucks removed blasted rock from the diversion tunnels and labored up a steep incline for disposal. 3 shifts of men worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to keep the tunnels on schedule. Frank Crow was responsible for keeping things moving. The hectic pace of construction had its consequences. Heat exhaustion cost 14 men their lives.
After the Depression and the crash, it was so difficult to get a job. Companies like the 6 companies could easily afford to cut a lot of corners in terms of safety and health of their workers, in terms of pay, in terms of comfort and that kind of thing, and they did.
Tensions came to a head in the scorching summer of 1931. Striking workers demanded better working conditions, fresh water, and improved safety precautions. 6 companies responded by firing 1,400 strikers and hiring fresh workers readily supplied by the Depression. Frank Crow was known as a fair man, but his hands were tied by the other members of 6 companies. However, soon after the strike, working conditions began to improve. In the end, when confronted with having a rough job or going hungry, most opted for the employment.
I came here in August in 1931, and I worked as a truck driver down at the dam site. I remember one stretch of 10 months without a day off, and we were working 7 days a week. And the pay was, to me, was great. It was $5 a day.
More than 5,000 men worked on the dam at the height of construction. Frank Crow, anxious about deadlines, often questioned their output.
He used to take the VIPs around and give them a tour. Well, one of these wives of one of the people that he was giving the grand tour said, "Mr. Crow, how many men do you have working here?" He said, "About half of them."
But Frank Crow didn't kid when it came to headlines. His hard-working team completed the diversion tunnels months ahead of schedule. In only 14 months, after digging the diversion tunnels, workers lined them with 3 feet of concrete. Special forms of gigantic proportion moved along the interior of the tunnels. But the job had just begun. They still had to force the river through the tunnels, build the powerhouse, intake tunnels, and the colossal dam itself. The most dangerous stage of construction was completed, but the most spectacular work was yet to come. 112 people lost their lives working on Hoover Dam. Ironically, the first and last persons killed, J.G. Tierney and P.W. Tierney, were father and son. Hoover Dam will continue on Modern Marvels. It wasn't machines that built Hoover Dam, it was men. People with different job titles, powder monkeys, muckers and high scalers. A labor force of thousands, blasted, dug, hauled, poured, dumped, loaded, and cleared the site in preparation for the dam. As work on the diversion tunnels progressed down below, more breathtaking work took place high above. Canyon walls required smoothing and shaping for the abutting dam. Men blasted thousands of cubic yards of rock from the sheer canyon faces. In daring acrobatic displays, high scalers swung from ropes to accomplish the bold feat.
That was a job that I imagine and just freak about it. And we're talking about a canyon that's 700 and some feet deep, from the top to solid rock at the bottom. They would hang on what they called bosun's chairs, just little wooden chairs. They would drill the holes that would later be blasted. Then they would go back down with their pikes and scale off all of that rock. And that was their job.
When dam construction began, the government wanted the high scalers and all employees out of the squatter-style camps and into more suitable accommodations. 6 companies labored to provide housing for their workers as quickly as possible and built Boulder City, 7 miles from the worksite. Men framed as many as 3 houses a day, and stories abounded of people coming home from work and mistakenly entering the wrong home.
They built everything that a city should have. It would have a movie theater, it would have entertainment, it would have schools for the children, it would have churches for people to go to.
Boulder City was a normal city in all senses, except that it was a government reservation. The federal government had full authority in the town. The Secretary of the Interior, Ray Wilbur, appointed Sims Ely to manage the city of 7,000 residents, a man who commanded respect. Sims Ely acted as judge, mayor, and Chamber of Commerce. He decided who would be given business licenses and what type of business they could have. Unlike many others during the Depression, people in Boulder City had a little money to spend. By choosing which businesses were allowed in town, Sims Ely determined for his workers how to spend their money more responsibly.
6 companies paid their workers half in real money and half in script. The only place you could spend this script was in the 6-company store.
As city manager, Sims Ely was also responsible for enforcing the law. There would be no alcohol or gambling within the city limits. Responsible for several thousand young men, Ely had a big chore on his hands. But federal marshals helped him with the seemingly impossible task.
He was wonderful. He was mean. You just didn't do anything wrong. He found out it immediately, so wonder me I wasn't pulled up in front of him.
With a 7-day-a-week work schedule, there wasn't much time for recreation. But the single, the energetic, and the organized made time. Alcohol and gambling weren't permitted in Boulder City, but just about everything was in Las Vegas. On payday, many men worked their shift, drove into Las Vegas, stayed out all night, then returned to their shift the next morning.
If you wanted real fun, true fun, you went down the hill into Las Vegas, where you had gambling and you had prostitution and you had all the liquor you could drink.
Only 30 miles away, Las Vegas offered an escape from the rigid rules of Boulder City. Boulder fueled the commerce and growth of Las Vegas. And like the international attraction it is today, Las Vegas accepted all varieties of currency.
The workers would go down to Las Vegas onto Block 16, which is the red light district, and they would drink and they would gamble and they would get serviced in the houses of prostitution along Block 16, and they would pay for it with the scrip. Then the prostitutes would take the scrip they earned, come back up to Boulder City with it and go shopping.
Being 30 miles from Las Vegas emphasized the fact that Boulder City was a haven. There was no crime in Boulder City, and to many it was a paradise, a sanctuary, free from the evils of the outside world.
It was a model town. It was perfect. It was meant to be perfect. You couldn't have any kind of alcohol. You better not. They had a gate outside town, and if you got stopped there and had alcohol, they arrested you on the spot.
We didn't know anybody in poverty. If someone wasn't working, they weren't here. And so we didn't know what poverty was.
Boulder City offered security, shelter, and a full belly. Stories about food were legendary. Food was good, and there was plenty of it. When others were starving, workers in Boulder City feasted on 3 square meals a day. The Anderson Brothers Mess Hall served as many as 1,300 men per seating. A staff of kitchen helps scurried around in a flurry of activity, preparing as many as 6,000 meals a day. Boulder City was more than a construction camp. It was a place where people could get a new start.
When they came to the Boulder City that was brand new, then they had an opportunity to build a whole civic structure from scratch.
But Boulder City wasn't for everyone. Typical of 1930s America, segregation was the rule.
It was supposed to be a perfect town, but the segregation was tremendous too. They had one black crew that worked on the dam. There was about 14 or 15 members. They could not even live in Boulder City.
6 companies did the hiring. Less than 1% of dam employees were black. The few who did work on the dam were given the least desirable positions. The new Secretary of the Interior, Harold Ickes, hoped to alter the situation, but he didn't have authority to change 6 companies' hiring practices. He did, however, have authority in Boulder City. He announced in 1933 that the few black employees could live there. It was a minor victory for the black employees who found discrimination a way of life. Herbert Hoover, champion and namesake of the dam, only visited it once, in 1932. Hoover Dam will return on Modern Marvels. While Herbert Hoover's administration began Hoover Dam, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's had to finish it. Hoover lost in a landslide to Roosevelt in his New Deal, but the new president continued supporting the dam and the thousands it employed. What Roosevelt didn't like was the name, Hoover Dam. Named after the former president, Hoover Dam had a serious identity crisis. Originally called Boulder Dam, even though it wasn't built in Boulder Canyon but in Black Canyon, then changed to Hoover Dam, Harold Ickes announced on May 8, 1933, the name would change yet again back to Boulder Dam. Fortunately, the great name debate didn't impede progress on the dam. On November 14, 1932, water began flowing through the Great Diversion Tunnels. Men successfully forced the entire Colorado River from its ancient bed. 2 temporary dams called coffer dams were erected to create a dry work area, one just below the diversion tunnel's inlets and the other just above the outlets so water wouldn't back up into the site. For 5 months, trucks dumped rock into the river, forming 2 enormous dams, the larger one being 100 feet tall and 750 feet thick at the base. Water was then pumped from between the dams and excavation began. Excavation 2 was a monumental undertaking. More than 40 feet of rock, sand, and silt had to be removed from the now dry riverbed. Steam shovels dredged 500,000 cubic yards of material in preparation for pouring concrete. And on June 6, 1933, the first bucket of concrete poured into the form at the bottom of the canyon. Producing enough concrete for the dam was a problem in itself. Hoover Dam required nearly as much concrete as all previous Bureau of Reclamation dams combined. A two-lane highway from Los Angeles to Boston could be built with the concrete used on Hoover Dam. A nearby riverbed provided the gravel. Men loaded material into train cars and transported it to the separating plant, where it was divided by size. Trains then hauled gravel to the two mixing facilities built to produce the tremendous amount of concrete. Night and day, concrete left the mixing plant, truckload after truckload, bucket after bucket, for placement in the dam forms.
It's not one a monolithic piece. It's poured more like a kid's Lego toys that lock together like that. And they poured grout in between those. So they poured it in individual blocks.
The dam was poured in forms from 25 to 60 feet square and 5 feet deep. If poured as one massive block, not only would it be inclined to crack, but it would take over 125 years to completely harden. The chemical reaction of hardening concrete also produced heat. Too much heat would cause the huge concrete blocks to crack. So steel pipes were inserted into the wet concrete and cold water pumped through the pipes to slow the curing process and reduce cracking. After a few days of hardening, a block could be poured on top or adjacent to it. A project of such magnitude and strict deadlines required innovative construction techniques. Frank Crowe pioneered the extensive use of cableways on earlier projects, but never before had cableways been used so efficiently. From 1/8 of a mile above, cableway operators choreographed a ballet between men and machine. Train cars transported concrete buckets from the mixing plant. Cableway operators lifted the 22-ton buckets and sent them gliding to the appropriate form. There, men released the safety locks and 16 tons of concrete poured into the form. Activity progressed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, pouring up to 1,100 buckets of concrete per day. The aerial cableways weren't the only innovations at the dam site.
We believe that this is where the hard hat was invented that everybody uses nowadays. The construction workers have been faced with debris falling on them from above, and they realized that they were going to have to do something. And so what they did was they put two baseball caps together like this, with the bill going this way and with this way. And then they took and dipped it in tar and took it out and dipped it in tar and let it harden and dipped it in tar and let it harden. And these were all homemade hats. The company didn't have anything to do with this.
But when several men wearing the homemade hats were saved from falling debris, 6 companies purchased thousands of hard-boiled hats for their employees. As the dam steadily grew in height, the splendor of its design was undeniable.
When you think of the construction of that dam, most of us, we were working specifically at some particular job, and we really didn't have a picture of what was happening around here or what was going to happen. And to me, it was a fascinating time to begin with, to come down there every day and just see that dam gradually going up.
Concrete pouring pushed the dam higher and higher. As it grew taller, so did the tales surrounding the project. Despite rumors, no one is buried in the concrete. A decomposing body would threaten the integrity of the dam. Besides, an average pour only increased the depth in the form a few inches. While the concrete was being poured, there were several ancillary projects happening simultaneously. 4 water intake towers were built in front of the dam. Giant steel pipes called penstocks connected to the intake towers and would funnel water to the generators and through the dam. Penstocks provided the internal plumbing of the dam and were as large as 30 feet in diameter. Producing these massive pipes tested the resources of the day. They were too large to ship. Workers instead erected an entire fabrication facility at the dam. Giant presses rolled 2 3/4-inch steel plates into 11-foot pipe sections, weighing 80 tons each. 2 pieces combined to make one colossal section 22 feet long. Tractors moved the enormous sections to the canyon rim, where the largest cableway floated them to the base of the dam. Each section was joined to other sections, forming over 1 mile of welded pipe. In front of the dam, engineers designed spillways to protect it in times of great flooding. Water would flow into the spillways instead of overflowing the dam. Only twice were the spillways used, once for testing and the other in 1983 during an exceptionally wet spring. That year, water flowed over the spillways at 52,000 cubic feet per second. Despite the record water flow, the spillways performed as designed more than a half-century earlier, and flooding downriver was minimized by the efficiency of the Colorado River system. With the spillways constructed, the dam was one step closer to completion and the fulfillment of its purpose. But there was a lot at risk. Filling the lake would be the only way to test the dam. At that point, structural failure would be catastrophic. The weight of water filling Lake Mead caused many earthquakes in the Boulder City area, some measuring as great as 5.0 on the Richter scale. Modern marvels will return. The dam was nearing completion. Workers finished the spillways. Its height reached 726 feet, and it became obvious that the dam was more than just a 6 million ton chunk of concrete. There was an elegance to it.
The visual with this dam, I think, is more spectacular than some of the others. Grand Coulee is a wonderful dam, but it's not nearly as spectacular to look at, and neither is Shasta.
The elegance of the design was no accident. Notable artists brought a touch of class to Black Canyon.
Gordon Kaufman was a very famous architect who is the one really responsible for the whole Art Deco appearance of the dam. He's the one that was brought in and designed the very sleek, angular, geometric lines and the planes of it, which make it such an interesting and unusual structure in itself.
The Art Deco design is found on the inside as well, from the elegant visitor elevators and aluminum doors, decorative railings in the powerhouse, terrazzo floors inspired by Native American design symbolize the power of the dam. And protecting the dam are the winged figures of the Republic, designed by Oscar J.W. Hansen. By the summer of 1935, the men of Boulder Canyon accomplished something amazing: the completion of concrete pouring 2 years ahead of schedule. What stood in the narrows of Black Canyon was a monument to Frank Crow and the men who built it.
To accomplish what Frank Crow did 2 years ahead of schedule and under budget had to be a tremendous individual. Maybe not loved by everybody, but certainly he set out to build the dam, and he accomplished that.
Frank Crow went on to do other projects for the government, but Hoover Dam was his crowning achievement.
The time we completed it, I just felt that I had been a part of something that was just tremendous.
On September 30th, 1935, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt came to the desert of the Southwest to dedicate the dam that so many had worked so hard to complete. On that day, President Roosevelt dedicated Boulder Dam, but from its inception there was confusion over the name of the dam. First Boulder, then Hoover, then back to Boulder, but finally, in 1947, an act of Congress changed the name back to Hoover Dam, and it remains that today. 4 months before Roosevelt's dedication, Lake Mead began filling. It took 6 years to reach maximum capacity, and the mighty structure successfully held back trillions of gallons of water. Water that could now be used to produce electricity. Water from Lake Mead flowed in through the intake towers to turbines, which in turn rotated generators. producing such a massive amount of electricity that by 1987 the power produced completely paid for the dam, plus interest.
We have a service area, including all of Southern California and Arizona, probably more than 20 million people that receive some of the power.
The river had been tamed, flood devastation minimized. Crops grew in a once barren desert, and free electricity was generated. Men had altered Mother Nature's design, but did they improve it?
There are no negative effects that were known at the time that construction occurred. Obviously, as we've learned more about river systems and we become more sensitive to environmental issues, we've learned that the natural environment is certainly affected by dams.
Dams change the natural flow of rivers and inevitably impact plants and animals.
More fish live here than ever could before. More animals, mountain sheep, birds, other animals, mountain lions, because the one scarce element, the one thing that was missing from this environment, water, is now here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
In spite of the abundance of wildlife, certain native species of plants and animals were negatively affected by damming the Colorado. Altering the natural habitat has led to the absence of many species within the Colorado River. Some native fish have found reproduction more difficult in the colder waters of Lake Mead. The environmental impact wasn't the primary concern for workers nearing the end of dam construction. Most were preoccupied with finding another job. When construction ended, most men left to work on other dams, but many stayed to work on the powerhouse and finishing touches. Unlike other construction camps, Boulder City didn't dry up. It remained a reservation until 1959, when it incorporated. Although the town could now permit alcohol and gaming, it didn't. While alcohol was finally offered for sale in 1969, Boulder City remains the only city in Nevada that doesn't allow gambling. 7 miles from Boulder City at the top of the dam sits a $125 million visitor center, built for the more than 1 million visitors who stop at Hoover Dam a year. Constructed in 1995, architects tried to match the elegance of the dam. Money generated from site tours will pay for half of the visitor center's cost. For a few dollars, visitors get an intimate look behind the curtain of concrete. In addition to dam visitors, 8 million people a year enjoy the recreational benefits of Lake Mead. Named after Elwood Mead, the former commissioner for the Bureau of Reclamation, Lake Mead is the largest man-made reservoir in the country. A problem that accompanies many reservoir systems is silting, or the building up of sediment at the bottom of a reservoir. Flowing water carries sediment with it, and if enough sediment collects, it can fill a reservoir, rendering it useless. But with the help of large reservoirs, like Lake Mead and 53 Bureau of Reclamation dams helping to trap sediment, silting is minimized on the Colorado River system. But the U.S. isn't the only benefactor of the Colorado's bounty. Despite past disagreements about water quality and quantity, Mexico receives 1.5 million acre-feet of water a year, downstream from Hoover Dam. Engineers designed Hoover Dam to provide many benefits, but they could not have foreseen the impact the completed project would have on people and the environment. From the close-knit community of Boulder City to California's fertile Imperial Valley, the Hoover Dam has changed the course of a river and the course of people's lives.
I think it symbolizes what the American people were about in that particular time in our history. We were moving to new frontiers. We were settling the West. We were building a nation. We were building a life. And the attitude was, we can do this.
And they did.